Welcome back to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack a piece of ancient text that is literally so dangerous to man-made religion, religious leaders actually tried to suppress it. We're talking about Galatians chapter 5. This is a text that sparked the Protestant Reformation, all because it completely shattered the whole concept of trying to earn God's favor. So if you've ever felt like your good works mean absolutely nothing, or if you've just felt totally trapped by religious performance, well, uncovering the historical context of this explainer might just change how you see everything. Let's dive in. I want you to consider the sheer weight of this number for a second. 613. For centuries before Jesus, God's people lived under the massive, absolutely crushing weight of the ancient Mosaic law. And look, we're not just talking about a handful of simple rules here. There were 613 daily commandments, covering literally everything: what you could eat, how to wash your hands, what fabrics you were allowed to wear, exactly when you could work. It created this relentless, exhausting cycle of guilt. Imagine waking up stressing about the rules, and then going to sleep just mentally replaying all the ways you failed to measure up that day. Because here is the painful truth: nobody could truly keep 613 commands perfectly. It was impossible.
So here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to quickly hit the impossible burden of the law, the trap of legalism, the war inside your soul, the fruit of the Spirit, and then wrap up with the law of love.
Starting right off with Section 1, the impossible burden of law.
To really grasp what's happening in this chapter, we have to look at how exhausting the ancient world was. The old system required these continuous, endless animal sacrifices just to temporarily cover human guilt. And the people were physically separated from God by this massive, heavy 60-foot temple curtain. But then we get the ultimate plot twist in human history. When Jesus sacrificed himself, justice was permanently satisfied. That massive 60-foot curtain, it literally tore from top to bottom. And that symbolized that the barrier was completely demolished, throwing permanent access to God's grace wide open for everybody.
Moving it right along to Section 2, the trap of legalism.
Okay, so after these early believers experienced this incredible freedom, false teachers swooped in and tried to trap them by adding those old rules right back into the mix. And this brings us to a massive 2,000-year-old misconception. Most people think fallen from grace means you lost your salvation because, you sinned too much. But get this, it's actually the exact opposite. It means abandoning grace as your primary operating system. It's stepping off the platform of grace to jump right back onto that exhausting treadmill of religious performance. You aren't falling into sin here, you're falling into legalism. Imagine you're a runner. You are totally in the zone, making great time on the track, and suddenly, someone just jumps out of nowhere and completely trips you up. That is exactly the athletic metaphor the Apostle Paul uses here. He asks them, "You are running a good race. Who cut in on you?" These false teachers were pushing believers backward. They were shoving them away from their newfound freedom and steering them straight back into slavery.
And he follows that up with a really brilliant everyday illustration. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. Anyone who's ever tried baking bread knows exactly how true this is. Adding just one tiny, seemingly harmless religious requirement might not look like a big deal at first. But give it time, and that tiny rule multiplies until the entire community is infected with legalism, and that beautiful, simple, liberating message of grace is just completely buried.
Which brings us to Section 3, the war inside your soul.
Look, once you're saved, things definitely don't instantly become easy. There is this brutal, exhausting, daily conflict inside every single believer between our old sinful nature, what the text calls the flesh, and God's Spirit. And when the flesh wins, well, the ancient text doesn't pull any punches. It lists everything from sexual immorality and wild idolatry, all the way to toxic relational sins like hatred, jealousy, and absolute fits of rage. Every single item here represents a life lived purely for selfish gratification, and it always leaves a trail of deeply broken relationships in its wake.
Now for the much better news. Section 4, the fruit of the Spirit.
Thankfully, for the believer, that fleshly nature is considered a defeated enemy, crucified with Christ. By choosing every day to let the Spirit lead instead, we see a completely different outcome: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Notice how wildly different this is from the chaos of the flesh we just talked about? And here's the secret: you can't manufacture these traits through sheer willpower. You can't just white-knuckle your way to peace. They grow naturally, kind of like apples on a tree, simply by staying connected to Christ.
What's actually super fascinating here is the original grammar. Paul doesn't say fruits with an S. It's not this plural menu where you get to pick and choose, like, oh, I think I'll work on my patience this month, and maybe I'll pencil in some joy for next month. No, he says fruit. singular. It is one unified organic outcome. When the Spirit is the one controlling your life, all of these amazing qualities grow together simultaneously, the whole shebang. So how do we actually do this on a practical level? Paul tells us to keep in step with the Spirit. This is actually a military term for soldiers marching in formation. Think about it. When an army marches, nobody impulsively runs 50 yards ahead of the commander, and nobody lags behind in fear. You move dynamically at the Spirit's pace. The old law was this static, rigid list of unbending rules, but keeping in step, that is alive. It's dynamic. It's moving when God moves, stopping when He stops, and just constantly adjusting to His pacing throughout your day.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, the law of love.
Now, when people hear that they are completely free from rigid laws, a lot of them immediately ask, well, does that mean I can just do whatever I want? But true Christian freedom isn't an excuse for selfishness. It's actually a higher calling to serve others humbly. The text says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. That entire crushing system of 613 laws, it all boils down to this one thing: stepping into someone else's overwhelming crisis to help them carry it, loving them exactly the way Jesus loved us.
Now, right after saying carry each other's burdens, the text literally says each one should carry their own load. Okay, at first glance, that sounds like a total contradiction, right? Until you dig into the original language. Burdens refer to overwhelming crises, addictions, and crushing griefs that are just way too heavy for one person to handle. We absolutely must step in and help with those. But loads, that refers to your normal daily adult responsibilities, your job, your personal choices. You can't enable irresponsibility. We have to carry our own daily loads, but we step in for the overwhelming burdens of others. It really is a beautiful, healthy balance when you think about it.
Paul wraps the whole thing up with an inescapable agricultural principle. You reap what you sow. Every choice you make is a seed. Sowing to the flesh, living entirely for yourself, inevitably yields a harvest of destruction, ruined relationships, and deep spiritual emptiness. But sowing to the Spirit, keeping in step with God, yields eternal life, deep joy, and a truly meaningful impact. It's a universal rule. You simply cannot trick the harvest. It will always match the seed you planted.
Which leaves us with this final, profound thought to close out our explainer today. Every single day, with every action and every decision, you are planting seeds. You are no longer under the crushing weight of 613 impossible laws, but you do have a choice in how you use your freedom. So I want you to look at your own daily habits, look at your responses to others, and the way you handle your struggles, and really ask yourself this: what kind of harvest are you planting for?